and was not prepared to do that, and approached us through his emissary, one of the colonels, Colonel Christopher Banis, who came to see us. We were aware, before we were approached, of this offer made by the IMF through our connections in London, who are close to Sir Geoffrey Howe. And we were also aware of the Arab connections that had happened earlier. In return for President Suharto and President Marcos's capitulation to the IMF's terms and conditions, they were to have their existing debts forgiven, absolutely, and the new lines of credit that were to be extended to them were to be upon better terms and conditions. When we heard the word perpetual, when we heard the word totally forgiven, we then immediately began to recognize what another group of holding companies operating with the previous group of holding companies that we mentioned were doing. And what they were doing, the second group of holding companies, was receiving credit from the first group of holding companies to purchase assets and liabilities from the prime banks. Now, the only liabilities they were purchasing were the liabilities represented by the deposits of the Arab nations. The only assets they were buying were the assets represented by the loans made to some of the debtor nations.
Now, you'll notice that these two holding companies, to which the money was given by the International Bankers Bank so that they could not be held responsible for what happened to the money that went out, the holding companies were holding nothing but liabilities of the loans made to the third world countries, which they could not repay. Now it is designed, as he's going to show, that the third world countries default on their payment. By the way, did you hear something about that this past week? It was on the news. What countries said that they would not pay? Brazil, and what else? Argentina. Both of them said, we're not going to pay. They didn't tell you that agreements had been made with those countries to eventually forgive their loans, did they? If they would sign away perpetually the rights to the minerals of those countries. Watch out. You're going to see a rash of third world countries not paying their debts, and then here is what will happen on the heels of that. The bank holding companies are designed to go broke, and watch the events from that point on.
It then became clear, as a result of actually initially observation and subsequently ratification by information from within the Trinational Commission, where we have our own people, that the forgiveness of the third world debts would quite obviously eliminate the assets which were being purchased by this second group of holding companies, leaving them only with the liabilities that were owed to the Middle Eastern nations.
So the group of holding companies, or the bank holding companies, are designed to collapse. When the third world countries say we cannot pay, the bank holding companies say we are bankrupt. At that point, the international bankers say to the Arabs, all right, boys, sorry, but the bank holding companies that we gave your money to under those 30-year time deposits of all these billions you've put into our banks over these years, those bank holding companies just went broke. So sorry, Arabs, but as of today, you are bankrupt. Possible for the Arab world to go bankrupt? Really? The richest people in the world? Now you'll understand why.
Being serviced by the prime banks. Hence, the Arab nations had no idea that these liabilities were now owned by the holding companies, any more than the debtor nations had stopped paying the prime banks.
Now he says that these Arabs, who were nothing but nomads roaming the deserts a few years ago, did not understand any of the inner manipulations of bank financing and world bankers. Therefore, they have fallen for this line all of these years. But now, within the past 6 to 9 months, the international bankers, or I should say the Arabs, have become aware of what the international bankers have done to them. A few months ago, I was in Northern California. An individual in the audience after the meeting said, "Pastor Williams, would you have a bite to eat with us after the meeting? I'd like to tell you something." When we sat at the restaurant, she said, "My company that I work for handles the transfer of money from Arab countries to America." She said, "We have been told that by May 1st, 1987, we must transfer so many millions of dollars out of the Arab countries into America in any kind of securities that are halfway decent to buy." She said, "Do you know why?" I said, "Yes, because the Arab sheikhs and sheiks realize that whenever they are declared bankrupt, that the people under them, the millions of people in the Arab countries who have been kept by giveaway programs of housing, food, schooling, medical care, everything, you have never seen such an uprising and turmoil and literal massacres as will happen in the Arab countries when they're declared bankrupt and the people can no longer be given all of these amenities. At that point, the sheikhs and sheiks know they'll have to run. Where are they going to run? They'll run to America, where they have already transferred their assets, and the date was given to me by this individual in Northern California that said, by May 1, we have been told we must transfer X number of millions of dollars out of the Arab world into the United States of America.
The prime banks and the holding companies arrangement was merely that the prime banks were going to act as servicing agents for the holding companies, again, so that the third world nations didn't know that the holding companies actually were owed the money, because it was filtering through the prime banks and still is. The effect of the elimination of the assets of the second group of holding companies is actually threefold.
Now, he says that the effect of this, when they announce to the Arabs that the holding companies are broke and that you are, as of today, bankrupt, what are the Arabs going to do in order to attempt to maintain some semblance of order back in their countries? He says the effect of that is threefold, and here are the three things that it will cause.
They would be insolvent and would be legally able to declare themselves insolvent.
First of all, the bank holding companies will be legally broke and can declare themselves insolvent, can say to the international bankers, we've just lost this money. The international bankers aren't responsible because they had only given the money to the bank holding companies, and the international bankers will say to the Arabs, boys, you're broke as of today. Now, the second effect.
Go into chapter 7 or 13, I forget, but one or the other. Declare themselves bankrupt, declare themselves insolvent, and legally and legitimately avoid payment to the Middle Eastern nations.
And legally and legitimately avoid payment to the Arab nations because the bankers had put it into bank holding companies which they could not be held responsible for. Are you beginning to see the utter degradation, the depth of low-down scoundrelism that's being done by the power controllers of the world to intentionally bring about a bankruptcy of people that they made some years ago? They made them, and now they're breaking them by a design plan, the same thing they're doing to the American public. Now let's go to the second point.
The precipitous effect of that, in view of the westernization of the third world nations, is obvious. They would have to and will have to liquidate all the other assets they have, at least a colossal volume of the other assets that they have.
Whenever the Arabs find out they're broke, they have but one choice: liquidate. What do they liquidate? Remember that now they have bought farmland all over America. They likewise have bought stocks and bonds. They control much of the New York Stock Exchange. And automatically, the next morning, after being declared bankrupt, they will dump their stocks onto the New York Stock Exchange. What will happen when the Arabs dump billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars of stock that they've bought on the New York Stock Exchange one Monday morning, what will happen to the stock exchange? What happens to farmland that is already depressed? Remember a few years ago that farmers' land was worth $3,000 an acre? Today that identical same farmland is worth $700 an acre because of deflation that is brought about by the Federal Reserve. Now the Arabs dump all that farmland for sale overnight. What will happen to the price of farmland? It'll be forced down even further, maybe $300 an acre. And when that happens, what happens to the farmer? He has no collateral to borrow money next year from the bank in order to plant his crop. What happens to the crops of America and the grocery store shelves and hunger in the cities? Are you beginning to see the scenario for control of a nation?